Picture a river. Not a small river you could skip stones across, but a river so wide you can barely see the far bank on a clear day, and on a grey day you can't see it at all. A river that smells like mud and cold and something ancient underneath, like the river itself has been here since before people had words for rivers. Now fill it with ships. Not the ships you're imagining, not sails and cannon and the romantic nonsense from movies. These are long ships, low and hungry looking, built so flat they can slide up onto a beach like a knife going under skin, maybe 60 feet long, maybe 20 wide at the thickest point, and they carry 40 men apiece who smell like they haven't bathed since autumn. Which, for many of them, is true. Add the smell of wood smoke from a dozen camps on the riverbank, the reek of horse, the sour smell of fermented milk drink that the locals here consume instead of water, like a civilizational decision that went in a specific direction, the smell of fish being gutted 3 feet from where someone is trying to sleep, the smell of men with weapons who are far from home and not particularly happy about any of it, and underneath all of it, threading through everything, a smell you can't quite name at first, something sweet and slightly wrong, the smell of a body that has been dead for 2 days in the September heat. That's where we're going tonight. The year is 922. The river is the Volga, cutting south through what will eventually become Russia, currently serving as the main commercial highway connecting the Norse world to the Arab world, via a web of rivers and portages that nobody who hasn't done it would believe is possible. And on this riverbank, wrapped in a temporary grave while the men around him argue about inheritance and precedence, and the precise wording of promises made drunk at a feast 6 months ago, a powerful Norse chieftain is waiting to be sent off properly. This is what a Viking burial looks like from the inside, not from a museum display with clean diagrams and carefully curated objects behind glass, not from a historical documentary with a tasteful narrator and period-appropriate music, from inside the camp, inside the smoke, inside the particular moral weight of watching something irreversible happen and choosing not to look away. I make these history sleep stories, and I'll be honest, I genuinely have no idea what kind of person listens to a detailed account of a 10th century Norse death ceremony as a way of winding down before bed. Either you're a serious history person who finds this legitimately calming, which I respect enormously, or you've made a series of personal choices that have arrived you here and you're committed to seeing it through. Either way, get comfortable. Here we go. Your eyes open before dawn. For half a second, just half a second, you don't know where you are. Then it hits you. The smell. Not one smell. Never just one smell. It comes in layers. The way everything in this camp comes in layers. Nothing clean or singular. Wood smoke first. The kind that has been sinking into fabric and skin and hair for days now. The kind that doesn't wash out. The kind you've stopped noticing in any objective sense, but that your body recognizes the moment you surface from sleep. Underneath that, the river. The Volga in September smells like cold mud and fish, and something faintly metallic, like very old iron rusting slowly in deep water. Above that, the sharp smell of pine resin from the fresh-cut timber stacked near your sleeping place. And cutting through all of it, present, and getting more present with each day, sweet and slightly wrong in that specific way. The body. The chieftain has been lying in a temporary grave since he died 2 days ago. His men took him out yesterday, washed him, dressed him, set him upright in the tent they erected near the burial ship. And you've been here long enough to understand that no matter how much incense the old woman burns, no matter how much spiced drink is poured over the threshold, no matter how many fires are lit against the September chill, the smell is still there. And this morning, it seems closer than it did last night, including you. You smell of pine tar and sweat and river mud, and the specific damp wool smell of someone who's been living rough for 10 days. The blanket pulled to your chin is rough against your jaw. The spruce boughs underneath you creak as you shift. The ground beneath them is slightly damp in the specific way that ground near rivers is always slightly damp, as if the river is expressing ownership of the surrounding earth. Welcome to the Volga River, September of 922 AD. You're Halvard Brynjulfsson, 19 years old. You came east from Norway 3 years ago with your father's cousin's trading band, and what started as a summer expedition has, through a combination of bad weather, good opportunity, and one catastrophically underplanned, winter turned into something resembling a life. You work with your hands, wood, mostly. You can shape a plank until it sits flush against its neighbour, without a gap wide enough to let in a fingernail. You can carve designs into the prow of a ship that will still be clear after 30 years at sea. You can look at a tree and see, not the tree, but the particular thing it is about to become. Your father had the same gift. You like to think he would recognise it in you. He's not here to ask. He's 3 months' travel away on a good day, assuming the rivers are running right and the portages are passable and nobody's charging excessive tolls at the transfer points. You sent word when you settled into this eastern life. You don't know if it arrived. The first sounds you hear, really hear, are the horses. There are 17 horses in the camp, picketed in a line a little way upstream, and in the mornings they wake up hungry and express this with that low resonant vibration that horses make when they're trying to communicate that they are a horse and they require food now, not later, now. After the horses, the fire. Someone, one of the younger thralls, the ones whose job it is to make sure the fires don't die overnight, is coaxing the main camp fire back to life. You can hear the whisper of bellows, the hiss of caught tinder, the first cautious crackle as a new piece of wood finds the heat and begins its conversation with it. Then voices, Norse voices, talking in the particular morning way people have before full consciousness commits itself. Not quite words yet, the sound of people negotiating their return to the day, and then another voice, further away, high and cracked and rhythmic, not talking, chanting. The old woman. She's been chanting since the chieftain died, not continuously. She sleeps, eats, does the necessary human things, but she keeps returning to it the way a tongue returns to a loose tooth, compulsively, ritually. The chant is always there, in the background of the camp, the way the river is always there. You've started to notice its absence more than its presence. Her name, approximately, in sounds your throat can produce, is something like Ingvar. She's not Norse. She's from somewhere else, travelled with this trading company for 7 years, and she knows the ceremonies. When a chieftain dies among these men, far from the proper temples and the proper priests, this woman is what exists instead. She told you this herself 3 days ago, in a mixture of 6 languages that you somehow managed to follow. I am the angel of death, she said, and smiled. And the smile was deeply, specifically unsettling. You believe her. You sit up. The spruce boughs creak under your weight. The blanket, heavy with morning damp, slides off your shoulders. Cold. September on the Volga isn't the killing cold you've learned to fear from Scandinavian winters. Not the cold that gets into your joints and stays for days. It's the sneaky kind. The kind that seems manageable until you've been sitting in it for 10 minutes and you realise your feet have gone half numb, without bothering to notify the rest of you. Your boots are outside the lean-to, not inside because you'd been foolish enough to wear them while they were still damp from crossing a muddy patch of bank 2 days ago. And sleeping next to slowly evaporating damp boots is worse than sleeping in cold air. This is something you know now that you didn't know a week ago. The Volga is good at teaching you specific things about what you should and shouldn't do. You lace the boots on. The leather is stiff, unhappy about being woken. The laces have gone slightly rigid, the way wet cordage does when it dries in the wrong shape. Your fingers, stiff with cold, fumble at the knots. The sun is not quite up. The sky above the tree line on the far bank has gone from black to a particular shade of dark blue that means you have maybe 20 minutes before light properly arrives. The river in this pre-dawn state has a quality like pewter, flat, heavy, carrying the reflection of nothing. You need to get to the boat, and when I say boat, I need you to understand that there are 2 boats in this story, and they matter differently. The one you're working on is a Nar, a trading vessel, Ulf's boat, 38 feet long, built for cargo rather than speed, sitting pulled up on the bank with the unglamorous practicality of a working animal. This is the boat you're being paid to seal. Pine tar, hot, pressed into the seams between planks. A job that takes concentration and produces a smell that gets into everything, including your dreams. The other boat is 50 feet down the bank, propped on log rollers in a carefully constructed cradle of timber, and it has not been in the water for days. That's the burial ship. That's the one with the serpent head carved into the prow, its scales precisely defined, its expression, if wood can have, an expression, attentive. The one that has been decorated since yesterday with dark fabric hung along its sides and carved wooden elements added to the bow and stern. The one that several men with specific knowledge of the esoteric requirements of vessels intended for use by the dead have been tending with careful hands. In 2 days that ship will be on fire on the river, but right now, in the pre-dawn grey, it's just sitting there on its rollers. And even from here, 20 meters away, there's something about it that makes you want to keep looking. The proportions. The particular way the prow curves upward against the sky. You've been watching it every spare moment since you got here. Let me stop here and tell you what here actually is, because here is important. The Volga burial that the Arab diplomat Ahmad ibn Fadlan witnessed in September of 922 is one of the most detailed first-hand accounts of a Norse burial ceremony ever recorded. Ibn Fadlan was an envoy from the Abbasid Caliphate sent north on a diplomatic mission that eventually deposited him on the bank of a major Russian river with a group of Rus merchants and Norse traders. He wrote everything down, diligently, with the precision of someone who knows they're watching something that will not come again, even when, especially when, what they're watching fills them with something between fascination and horror. His account describes the ceremony in its entirety, the preparation of the dead chieftain, the role of a woman he calls the angel of death, the grave goods, the animals sacrificed, the thrall who accompanied her master, the burning ship. He's horrified by most of it. He says so, repeatedly, with the frankness of a 10th century diplomat who has decided that accuracy matters more than tact. But he writes it all down anyway. Every detail, every smell, every cup of drink, every prayer, every moment. You're in the margins of his account tonight. Hallvard, one of the craftsmen, one of the anonymous men bending over the burial ship in the early morning light, one of the hands on the log rollers when the ship goes to the water. We're going to live the parts that Ibn Fadlan was too polite to linger on. The pine tar has loosened by the time the sun clears the tree line. You can tell because the smell changes from the cold, almost pleasant resin smell of solid tar to the hot, enveloping, completely unavoidable smell of tar that's been near a fire long enough to become workable. Your tool is a piece of flat wood about a foot long, wrapped at one end with strips of old wool. This is your brush. It's a primitive brush. The Romans would have done better, and the Byzantines you've met at trading posts absolutely do better. But this is what you have, and what you know how to use. You crouch along the hull, outside the hull, not inside, with the tar pot balanced on a plank across the log rollers. The pot radiates heat upward toward your face, close enough that if you lean in wrong, you feel it on your eyebrows. You've learned not to lean in wrong. You dip the wool-wrapped end into the tar, pull it out quickly, too long in there and the wool starts to fuse, and then you're pulling it out in layers and the whole thing falls apart. A coat of black steaming tar on the end, and you press it into the seam between two planks. The wood hisses, a small sound, like something small being surprised. The tar filling the tiny spaces between the planks, displacing air, and the air making the smallest possible objection. You work it in with a pressing, twisting motion, back and forth. You feel for places where the wood resists differently, where there's a gap that needs more. The resistance tells you things. Your father said once that a good shipwright builds with his fingertips, not his eyes. Your father was, among other characteristics, a person who told truths that sounded like mysticism. This one turned out to be the literal truth. You can feel, through the end of this wool-wrapped stick, the difference between a seam that's taking the tar and a seam that isn't. The difficult ones you go back to. You press harder. Add more tar carefully and press again. The smell wraps around you like a second skin. Under this close, physical, focused attention, your mind does what minds do when the hands are busy. It wanders. It wanders to the tent at the centre of the camp, where the old woman has been chanting since before dawn, to the burial ship on its rollers, to the chieftain inside the tent sitting upright in his best clothes, waiting, to the young woman you spoke to yesterday briefly in the dim interior of that tent, whose name is approximately Murrit, and who told you something that you've been carrying since she said it. She volunteered. That's what she said. You press the tar into the seam. The wood accepts it. The hissing fades. You should know more about the camp before you meet her. This isn't a military encampment with organised structure. This is approximately 400 Norse men and women and assorted others, traders, servants, thralls, a small contingent of local people curious about the proceedings, living along 300 metres of riverbank in whatever shelter they've managed to construct. Some people have proper tents. Those people are doing better than you. You have a lean-to built from spruce branches and a piece of oiled canvas propped against the side of Ulf's Nah. It keeps the rain out, mostly. The ground underneath is always slightly damp. Ulf Ulfsson is your employer. 52 years old, built like a woodpile, has been trading this river system for 15 years. He knew the chieftain since they were both young men raiding the coast of what will eventually become England. He's not taking the death well, but he still needs his boat sealed before the rain that's been threatening since yesterday arrives. And sealing boats is your specific, useful, employable talent. The chieftain himself, I keep calling him that because Ibn Fadlan is somewhat careful about his name, referring to him mostly by status, died unexpectedly, not from battle, not from a dramatic wound. He died of an illness that started as a cough and became, over 10 days, a catastrophe. By the end, he couldn't breathe without enormous effort. Eventually, the effort was not enough. He was in his 50s. He'd been trading this river system for 20 years. He had 3 ships, a trading compound back in what will eventually become the city of Novgorod, and more silver than you can comfortably imagine. He had fought in England, in Ireland, possibly in Francia, though those stories get unclear at the edges. He had the scars to suggest all of it was true. Now he's dead. In 2 days he will be sent off correctly. In the meantime, the men who will handle the next 20 years of this river's trade are having some very tense conversations in the corners of the camp. You catch the edge of one of these conversations on your way from the tar pot to the tools. 2 of the chieftain's lieutenants are standing near a pile of covered goods, talking in the too quiet voices of people who want privacy in a space that doesn't have any. Gunnar, who is large and quiet and has a scar from chin to ear that was probably interesting to receive. Hrafen, who is shorter and quicker, with the bright eyes of someone who is very good at arithmetic. Something about the compound, about whose word counts and doesn't count, about a promise made drunk at a feast 6 months ago, and its legal standing in any framework either of them is willing to invoke. You don't slow down. You keep walking. In this camp, being invisible is the second safest thing you can be. You're good at being invisible. The safest thing would have been not to come at all. But Ulf needed a boat sealed, and you needed silver, and here you are. You store the conversation anyway. The camp has its politics, the way all camps do, the way all collections of people around something large and important do. The burial is the centre of it. Everything else orbits the burial. Gunnar and Hrafen will keep being tense and quiet until the ceremony is done. Then one of them will do what they're going to do. Your job is to not be in the way when that happens. The afternoon of the second day is when you meet her. Not meet exactly. You've seen her in the camp. She's been visible in the way that thralls are visible in a Norse camp. Present, functional, noticed only when someone needs something done. She moves efficiently. She doesn't draw attention. But you haven't spoken to her until the afternoon of the second day, when you come into the large tent with an armload of firewood that someone handed you outside with a look that clearly communicated you were expected to know what to do with it. You nearly run into her standing directly inside the entrance. Sorry, you say. Norse, which is the language of the camp, the word that works for everyone here. She doesn't step back. She has the look of someone who has spent 3 years in a situation that required constant assessment of everyone around her. Not suspicious exactly, more evaluative, like the old woman, but from a different position. The old woman evaluates you from a position of power. This woman evaluates you from a position that has required her to become very good at understanding who people are before they do anything. You're the one sealing the "na," she says. Norse, accented but solid. 3 years is enough to learn the essentials if you're paying attention, and she's clearly been paying attention. Yes. Ulf's boat. Yes. Is it finished? The sealing's done. The rest tomorrow. She nods, steps aside to let you past with the wood. You duck around her and move toward the fire, which has burned down to sulky coals that need attending. The smell inside the tent is not a single thing. Layers, as always. Incense first, thick and slightly, sweet, cedar resin, and something else, something burned deliberately. Underneath that, the tent fabric itself, canvas and poles and the cold smell of enclosed space. The fire. and underneath all of it, threading through everything, closer here than anywhere else in the camp. You focus on the wood, setting it carefully, getting the angle right for the fire to catch. The chieftain is behind you. He's been prepared, dressed in his finest clothes, set upright. This is part of the ritual, the sitting upright. The clothes, you've heard from the men who carried the chest, are silk. Byzantine silk from Constantinople, green and gold embroidered at the collar and cuffs, worth more than everything Ulf owns combined. He's wearing them now, sitting upright in the dim light of the tent. You don't turn around to look at him. You focus on the firewood. You're handling the firewood. That's enough. They've decided, Marit says from behind you. You know what she means, but you ask anyway, hoping you're wrong. Decided what? A pause, the fire beginning to catch finally, new wood finding the heat. I volunteered, she says. The word sounds like she's used it before, used it until it means something different from what it started as. A word that has been turned over enough times to develop smooth edges. 3 days ago, someone had to go with him, someone who served him, knew him. You turn around, you look at her. She's looking at the fire. Her face is completely still. Not the stillness of someone who isn't feeling anything. The stillness of someone who is feeling everything and has made a decision about how much of it to show. She has brown eyes with gold in them. You didn't notice until right now, because until right now you were looking at her face generally, not her eyes specifically. Merit, you say. She looks at you. Really looks. Like she's deciding something about you. Don't, she says. I wasn't going to. Everyone says something, the men in the camp. Even the woman, she means the old woman, says things about honour, about the gods, about what waits on the other side. She pauses. I don't need you to say things. I need you to carry the firewood in and go seal your boat. You look at her for a long moment. Then you put the last piece of wood by the fire, stand up, and turn toward the exit. The sealing's done, you say. I told you. She makes a small sound. The beginning of something that might have been a laugh, arrested, decided against. You step out into the grey afternoon. You stand outside with palms that remember the shape of the tent's entrance post. September air hits your face after the warmth inside. Not refreshing, just different. River air, with that sharp undertaste of rotting reed and something metallic coming up from the water itself. The iron-cold smell of a river that runs through ancient beds. The camp continues around you with complete indifference to everything that just happened in there. Someone is mending harness near the horse line. Somewhere wood is being split, methodical, the double thud of an axe with a pause between, then again. 2 men are dragging a heavy net along the bank, weighted with river stones for ballast. A dog trots past with a bone from last night's supper, looking very satisfied about the whole arrangement. You turn the word volunteered over in your head. It doesn't settle into any framework you understand. Volunteered means having something to choose between. Volunteered means one side of the scale is empty, and you put something of your own into it. But if both sides are already loaded, one with death now, the other with death in a year from illness, or a blow in a drunk argument, or simply that gradual dying that happens to people whose lives belong to someone else, then what does volunteered mean? You don't know. You're 19 years old, you're from Norway, and your hands are black with pine tar. Go back to work. The Tsar waits with the patience of an old animal. 38 feet from stem to stern. The sides built from oak planks laid overlapping. Clinker construction, each board covering the one below by 3 fingers width. This is what your father called a living hull, a structure that moves with the wave instead of standing against it. Good Norse ships bend, bad ones break. Your father built good ones. The tar pot is still warm from the morning. You put fresh coals under it, coax the fire patiently, wait for the temperature to return. Hot tar flows. Cold tar doesn't work. This is a simple rule you cannot negotiate with. While the pot heats, you walk the hull with your hands, not your eyes, your hands. Your palms move along the seam between planks. You're looking for the place where the pressure of your fingers meets resistance differently. Slightly softer, slightly emptier. The place where water will find a path if given enough time. There it is. At the 6th frame, closest to the bow, the seam looks correct. The tar is there, holding its shape. But under your fingertips is something else. There is space behind the surface, small, the size of a thumbnail. Enough. You mark the spot with chalk and walk to the pot. The next 2 hours are hands and tar and wood and nothing else. This is what you do better than anything. Not trade, not talk, not impress people with silver and swords. You hear through your hands what the wood says. Your father called it listening to the seam. A seam is either honest or it isn't, he used to say. A dishonest seam will always tell you. You just have to be patient enough to listen. The tar hisses when you press it into the 6th frame. Good hissing. Air leaving from under the tar, not from under water. You work this spot longer than the others. Press, twist, add a layer, press again. The wood accept it. You move on. Sweat runs down your back despite the September cold, just from the effort, from the bent spine, from the clenched hands. After an hour, how your left shoulder starts its familiar ache, the place that has ached since last summer. An old story. You shift your grip, redistribute the load, continue. The camp flows around you. Then, a sound. Not the sound you were expecting. Not horses, not the axe, not the voices of men dividing someone else's inheritance at the edges of your hearing. A different sound. Quiet, methodical, with a specific rhythm. Like someone choosing words and laying them down carefully, one after another. Like bricks. You straighten. Look around. A little further up the bank, on a fallen log near the water, sits a man you haven't noticed before. Or noticed, but never distinguished from the general background. He's dressed differently from the Norsemen. Different cloth, different cut, different boots. A dark face, a neat black beard. And in his hands, something that most people in this camp don't possess as a phenomenon. Writing materials. A small wooden board coated with wax. A thin bone stylus, with which he writes quickly, without stopping. He's writing. Right now. He looks at the camp, then down, then back at the camp. You take a moment to understand what specifically interests him. He's looking at the burial ship. Let me stop here. The man with the writing board is Ahmad ibn Fadlan, secretary and religious advisor to an Abbasid Caliphate embassy, dispatched from Baghdad in 921 AD on a diplomatic mission to the Volga Bulgars. The journey took about a year and eventually deposited him precisely here, on the bank of the Volga, in September of 922, a few meters from a Norse burial that he will describe in more detail than almost any other account of its kind that survives. Ibn Fadlan keeps detailed records of everything: the climate, the customs, the way people dress, the way they eat, the way they pray, or fail to pray, which distresses him separately. He writes with the punctuality of a man who knows he's watching something important, even when, especially when, what he's watching horrifies him. His account will survive. It will outlive him by over 1,000 years. In our times, scholars will argue about the specific details of his manuscript, the correct reading of particular words, exactly what he saw, and what he might have misunderstood. But he writes, right now, with a thin-boned stylus, and you walk toward him, not from curiosity, from tar. The pot sits on the other side of the log where Ibn Fadlan is sitting, and you need to pass him to reach it. You walk carefully, trying not to crunch on the gravel, an old habit from childhood, when adults talked about important things and you wanted to listen without disturbing. He doesn't look up. He writes. But when you pass close enough, he says, without raising his eyes, "You're the woodworker." Arabic. You know enough Arabic to understand simple questions. 3 months at a trading post on the Atil taught you the essential vocabulary: trade, water, price, how much, plus approximately 20 words you hadn't planned to learn, but they heard themselves into you anyway. Yes, you say. Also in Arabic, which clearly surprises him, he finally looks up. His eyes are quick and intelligent. They do the same thing Marit's eyes did, assess, before the face has time to form an expression. You made the ship? He nods toward the burial vessel. No, I made that. You gesture with your chin toward the nar, the caulking, the tar. Ah. He looks back at his board. Tell me. That ship over there, will it burn quickly? Strange question. But you think about it honestly. Old wood, you say. Dry. Tar in the seams. Yes, quickly. He writes. You're Norse? He asks, still not looking up. Norway. You believe in this? He makes a broad gesture with his hand, taking in the whole bank, the whole camp, the whole meaning of the last 3 days. You think about the answer longer than usual. I believe that they believe, you say. He looks at you properly for the first time. A long look, then writes something brief. A good answer, he says. An honest one. He drops his gaze back to the board. You walk to the tar pot, but you don't work. Not immediately. You stand at the tar pot with both hands wrapped around it for warmth. The outer clay cool, the heat coming from within radiating into your palms, and you watch Ibn Fadlan write. He's fast. The stylus moves with practiced efficiency, and he doesn't pause or cross things out. He already knows what he wants to say. He's been composing it in his head while watching, and now he's simply transcribing from memory onto wax. You wonder what he sees. Not the literal things. You can see those yourself. The burial ship, the decorated hull, the carved prow. What you wonder is what he sees when he looks at all of this from outside the framework that gave it meaning. He came from a civilization that has been literate for 1,000 years, that has libraries, that has architects who build in stone and mathematicians who have given names to concepts you don't have words for. And he's sitting on a log on the Volga, writing about Norse people burning a ship. Respectfully, you think. He's writing respectfully. You can tell from the care of the movement. He's not writing mockery. He's writing testimony. You go back to the tar pot. You go back to work. The afternoon gives you the seam at the 7th frame too, which you weren't expecting. This one is different from the 6th. Not empty underneath, but split. A hairline fracture in the wood itself, so small it's invisible to the eye but present to the fingers. A place where the plank dried unevenly during some winter in some port you'll never know. The crack runs with the grain for about 4 inches. Not through the plank, not yet, but heading that direction with the patience that wood has. the slow patience of a thing that does not need to hurry. You work it differently from the sixth frame. The tar needs to penetrate rather than seal. You heat the pot hotter, close enough to the coals that you're sweating again before you start, and you thin the tar with a small amount of pine oil from the jar at the bottom of your tool bag. The oil lets it run deeper into the crack before it sets. Your father showed you this. Not on a boat, on a barn door that was splitting along the top of the frame. Same principle. Wood doesn't care what shape it's in. It cracks the same way in a door and a hull. Treat the wood as wood, your father said, not as what it's part of. The wood doesn't know it's a boat. The thinned tar seeps into the crack. You watch it go. Press your palm flat against the plank and feel, through your hand, the minute change in temperature as the hot tar distributes through the cool wood. 4 minutes. 5. You add another layer. 6 minutes. You run your fingertip along the hairline and it meets resistance. Sealed. Not perfect, not permanent, but honest enough to survive this season and probably the next. Good enough. You pack your tools and move to the 8th frame. By the time the sun starts its September descent, low and amber, the kind of light that makes even riverbank mud look like it has gold in it, you've worked your way from the 6th frame to the 14th and back again, and the Nars hull is as honest as you can make it. You stand back and look at it. 38 feet of oak and tar and work, every seam checked, every suspect place addressed. 3 days of your hands, which means 3 days of your father's teaching, which means 3 days of his father's teaching, which means whatever nameless craftsman first figured out that hot tar pressed into wood seams could make the difference between drowning and not. That knowledge is in your hands right now. It's a strange thought. You've had it before, but it lands differently here, on the Volga, in the September light, with a ceremony happening 50 feet away that is also, you realize with the slight surprise of an obvious thing noticed late, a form of transmitted knowledge. The old woman's 40 years of ceremony, the specific words, the specific sequence, the specific materials. All of it passed down through some chain of hands you can't trace, same as the tar technique, same as the clinker construction, same as every useful thing humans have figured out. We're all just keeping things alive long enough to hand them on. You clean your tools, wrap the tar brush in oilcloth to keep it from hardening, secure the pot, take the chalk, pack everything into the worn leather bag that has been with you since Norway. The bag smells as tar and salt water and pine resin and 3 years of travel. It's your father's bag. He gave it to you when you left. You shoulder it. You go to find food. The food situation in the camp is organized around 2 main fires. One serves the chieftain's men, the inner circle, the lieutenants, the people who have a direct relationship to the burial and its proceedings. You don't eat there. That's not your place, and you know it, and nobody has said it, and nobody needs to. The other fire is for everyone else. The craftsmen, the secondary traders, the servants and thralls not involved in the ceremony preparations. A small group of men from further east whose language you don't recognize but whose appetite for smoked fish appears to be universal. Tonight there is actual cooked meat, not just fish, not just the hard bread that's been the staple. Actual meat from 2 of the animals sacrificed earlier in the day. This is normal, Ulf explained when you first arrived. The animals given to the ceremony don't go to waste. The gods receive the spirit. The people receive the body. The practical theology of a people who live too close to starvation to be sentimental. You take your share, a piece of something that's mostly tough and gamey and wonderful after a day of physical work, and you eat it standing up near the fire watching the camp. The man to your left is named Egil. He's a tent maker, hired for the expedition not because anyone planned on dying on it, but because tent makers get hired for long expeditions as a matter of course. He's about 35, broad across the shoulders from a lifetime of working with heavy canvas, with hands so thick-fingered they look like they belong on a larger person. He's eating with the concentration of someone who takes food seriously. "You're the tar man," he says without looking up. "The caulker, yes." "Knar looks good." He glances toward it, then back to his food. "You checked the bow joint?" 3 times. "Good. That joint's weak. Always is on a Gnar that age." You look at him. "You checked the hull?" "I check all the hulls I sleep near." He shrugs. "Good practice." This is the kind of thing that you hear in trading camps from people who've been doing this long enough to have specific practical superstitions that have earned their status through experience. He's not being paranoid. He's being correct. "It's solid," you say. "I found a crack at the 7th frame, treated it." He nods, goes back to eating. You eat. The fire makes the camp social noise it always makes. Voices overlapping, different languages, creating a kind of texture that you've started to hear as weather rather than conversation. Norse on top mostly. Arabic from Ibn Fadlan's direction, where he's apparently in discussion with one of the men from further east through a third person who speaks both. Something that might be an early form of what will eventually become Russian, from the group of locals at the camp's edge who showed up on the first day, established that they were there to watch and not to participate, and have been watching quietly ever since. Those men interest you. You've been watching them since day one, and haven't yet found a way to talk to them that doesn't seem like an intrusion into something private. There are 4 of them. Local men, not Norsemen, not from the south, from here, from the particular patch of river and forest and sky that you've been passing through. They dress in the furs and woven wool of people who have figured out the local winter, which is a more demanding winter than anything you grew up with. Their faces are broad and weathered and give very little away. They showed up the first morning with gifts, smoked fish and a type of dried berry you don't recognize, presented to one of the chieftain's lieutenants with a formality that suggested this wasn't their first interaction with Norse trading expeditions. The gifts were accepted with equivalent formality. Then the 4 men found a spot at the camp's edge, and they've been there since, watching. Specifically watching the burial preparations. After supper, in the grey light between day and dark, you walk the edge of the camp with your empty cup and your tiredness and the loose, directionless feeling of a day's work completed, and you end up near where the 4 local men are sitting. One of them looks up. He's older than the others, grey at the temples. A scar on his chin that's old enough to be smooth. Whatever made it is long resolved. His eyes are dark and considering, and he doesn't look away when you make eye contact. You don't look away either. A skill you're developing. He says something, his language. You have none of it. 0 words. You spread your hand slightly in the universal gesture of apologetic incomprehension. He speaks again. Then he points at the burial ship. Then at himself. Then he makes a gesture you don't understand immediately, his hand sweeping outward from his chest, fingers spreading like something being released. Then he points at the ship again. You think about this. He's saying, "We do this too," or "I understand this," or something in that neighbourhood. "Yes," you say. Norse, which he doesn't have either. He nods, like that's sufficient. like the word yes in any language, covers the relevant ground. You stand there for a moment, the two of you, looking at the burial ship in the dying light. Then he says something else, and one of the younger men passes him a cup of whatever they're drinking, and he extends it toward you. You take it. It tastes like nothing you've had before, fermented like the drink made from grain, but different in the base. Something earthier, something that tastes of forest floor and berries, and a long process happening in a clay pot somewhere in the dark. You drink. Hand the cup back. He nods again, points at you, a question in it. Halvard, you say. Your name. He says his own name. Something that sounds like Yermak, but probably isn't. You're filtering an unfamiliar language through Norwegian ears, which is not a precise instrument. But you try the sound back at him, and his expression shifts slightly in the direction of being pleased that you tried. You sit down near them. Nobody says anything. This is fine. The fire makes its fire sounds. The river makes its river sounds. The four local men drink their fermented forest drink and watch the burial preparations, and you sit with them and watch the same thing. After a while, the one called something like Yermak says something to the youngest of the four men, who untucks something from inside his coat and hands it across. A carved wooden object, small enough to fit in the palm. An animal, a bear you think, though the style is different from any carving you've seen. The bear rendered in a way that emphasizes certain qualities over others. The shoulders massive, the face simplified to something almost abstract, the whole thing smooth from years of handling. He passes it to you. You take it carefully. The wood is warm from being carried inside his coat. Dense and close-grained, very old, the surface worn to a finish no knife could achieve, only hands over time. You look at it, really look, the way you look at a hull seam, asking it what it is, what it's for. This bear has been held by a lot of people for a long time. You can feel it in the weight of the thing, in the specific warmth of handled wood, in the smoothness that is specifically hand smoothness, the oils of skin working into grain over generations. You hand it back, carefully, with both hands. He takes it and tucks it back inside his coat. You sit with them until the dark is complete. The bonfire that night is different from the previous nights. The chieftain's men build it larger, much larger. You help, because someone taps you on the shoulder and gestures toward the woodpile, and you understand what's being asked. For an hour you and four other men carry wood, big pieces, arm thick, the kind that burns for hours, and stack it in the way that one of the older men directs. Not just a fire for warmth and cooking, a fire for the ceremony. The specific fire that will be required tomorrow morning and tonight. Around this fire, before the final day, the men gather, all of them, even Ibn Fadlan, who positions himself slightly to the side in his characteristic way of being present without quite participating, his wax board balanced on his knee. Even the four local men, who somehow know they're invited, or decide they are, and take a position at the edge of the circle with the quiet confidence of guests who understand the nature of the gathering without speaking the language. Ulf begins. The skald tradition, the formal praise poetry of the Norse world, requires a specific kind of voice, not loud necessarily, but projected, shaped, with an understanding of how words carry differently when there's a fire between you and your audience. Ulf doesn't have a professional skald's training. He's a trader, but he's been sailing for 30 years with men who sometimes died at inconvenient distances from anyone with formal credentials, and he's learned what he needs to know. He begins with the chieftain's name, his full name, his father's name, his grandfather's name, the chain of men, going back into the past until the past becomes legend and the legend becomes something older than checking. Then he begins the deeds, the raid on England, not in the abstract but specific, the year, the coast, the name of the river where the longships came aground and the men poured out at dawn while the village was still sleeping. The chieftain, 23 years old, running up the bank in the grey morning with a sword in his right hand and someone else's silver in his future. The storm that took half his ships on the second English voyage. Ulf was there for this one. You can tell from the way he tells it, the specific texture of a memory, not a story. The way the wind changed direction 3 times in an hour, each time worse than the before. The sound of a keel breaking. The man who went overboard and was never found. The chieftain's decision afterward to turn for home with what remained. He could have kept going, Ulf says. He had enough men, enough ships. He could have made it work. A pause. He turned for home instead, because what he had was real, and what he might have gotten was only might. This lands in the group around the fire with the weight of something that means more than one thing. The chieftain knew when enough was enough, not when to give up. That's different. When to protect what was real against the risk of what was only possible. You think about the star, about the 7th frame, about the difference between treating a crack now and letting it develop until it decides for you. The same lesson, different materials, continues. 2 hours later, the formal telling is done and the informal one begins. This is the better part, the rough-edge stories, the ones that don't quite make it into praise poetry because they're too human, too specific, too much about a real person rather than a heroic one. The 4-language argument. You heard this last night, but tonight a different man tells it, with different details. The argument was about the price of silk. The chieftain negotiated it in Norse, then Greek, then Arabic, then a language the storyteller can only describe as that clicking thing they do down by the Caspian. He kept each party convinced the others were getting worse terms. By the end, all 4 parties thought they'd won, and the chieftain walked away with silk at 1/3 of its going rate. The cats. Multiple people have their own cat story. Apparently this was well known. The man who travelled with the chieftain for 12 years says it started when a cat appeared from nowhere on a ship in the middle of the ocean 3 days from any land and stared at the chieftain with such focused intention that he was convinced it was a spirit wearing cat shape. After that, all cats were suspect. The morning food. This story comes from a woman, one of his wives, who's been mostly silent these 3 days, processing her grief in a way that doesn't require an audience. But she tells this one. A. Dish her predecessor made, a woman who died of fever 20 years ago. Nobody can reproduce it exactly. She tried for 15 years. He always said it was good, she says, but the look on his face said it wasn't quite right. She smiles when she says this. It's a specific smile, the kind that contains both grief and love, and the wry recognition that these 2 things don't oppose each other. You're learning something about how mourning works. It's not a single thing. It's not silence and tears and the formal weight of ceremony, though those are part of it. It's also this, sitting around a fire saying true things about a person, the good and the complicated and the specifically human, the cats, the morning food, the look on his face. This is the medicine for grief that no ceremony can replace. The ceremony handles the cosmological part, the going somewhere, the proper sending. But the medicine for the people who stay is this. True stories. A person made real by the specific, irreplaceable details of how they were themselves. You listen for a long time, you don't speak, you don't have stories to contribute, but you listen with your whole attention, which is the courtesy available to someone who has nothing else to offer. When you finally look over at Ibn Fadlan, he's not writing. He's listening too. His wax board on his knee, the stylus still, eyes moving from face to face as each speaker takes their turn. He's paying attention. He catches eye across the fire. He nods slightly. Not a social nod. The nod of someone acknowledging something shared. Both of you are witnesses. Both of you are doing the only useful thing available. The storytelling goes until well past midnight. You know because you can track the stars above the firelight, and their position has moved significantly by the time the stories slow and the fire burns lower and people begin the small preparations of going to sleep. The 4 local men leave first, quietly, in the specific way of guests who understand the right moment to go without being told. The one called something like Yermak nods at you as he passes. You nod back. Ibn Fadlan is next. He gathers his materials with methodical care, wraps the board in a piece of oiled cloth, caps the stylus. He doesn't say anything as he leaves, but he pauses for a moment at the edge of the firelight and looks back at the burial ship on its rollers, and the expression on his face in that moment is something you won't find a word for in Norse or Arabic or any of the other languages in your partial collection. It's the expression of someone who is trying to be precise about something that resists precision. A diplomat. A man trained to find the right words for difficult things. And the burial ship on its rollers has beaten him. Temporarily. He'll find the words later, on the boat home in Baghdad, writing it up properly. He'll find them. But right now, in this moment, he just looks. Then he goes. You sit with the dying fire. For a while longer. Ulf is still there. And 2 of the chieftain's older men, and the wife who told the morning food story, though she's gone quiet now, wrapped in a blanket, watching the coals. None of you speak. This is its own kind of ceremony. The informal one. The one that happens after the formal one, when the words has been said, and all that's left is presence. Being in the same place together, feeling the same loss from different angles. The fire goes to coals. The coals go to ember glow. You sleep. Day 3, before the burning. You wake before dawn for the first time without the smell being the first thing. The smell is there. The old woman's special fire and the river and the ceremony and the body that is now more properly prepared but still present. But what wakes you first is sound. A specific sound. Someone is working nearby. Metal on wood with a particular rhythm. Not aggressive. Not construction. Something smaller and more deliberate. A tapping that has a cadence to it, like it's following a pattern. You get up. It's the craftsman from further along the bank, a man you've seen but not spoken to, who was brought specifically for the burial ship work. He's Norseman from the eastern trade routes, someone who has been on the Volga for years, with a competence in specific kinds of decorative woodwork that this camp required. He's crouched at the bow of the burial ship, working in the pre-dawn dark by the light of a small clay lamp, adding something to the prow carving, a final detail that needs to be done this morning before the ceremony begins. You watch him for a moment. His tool is a small curved chisel, the blade no wider than your thumbnail. He's working in the area just below the serpent's jaw, adding scales that weren't there before. Not large scales, small ones, tight together, following the curve of the neck. Each one is struck in 2 or 3 blows precisely, Without measuring each time, he's past measuring. He knows the size of this scale from the 100 scales before it. This is what mastery looks like at 5 in the morning on the Volga, with a lamp the size of a fist and a ceremony starting in a few hours. He doesn't stop when he notices you. He just says without looking up, "You're the tar man. Yes, your knotwork." He nods toward the band of pattern running along the waterline. Your contribution from day one. It's good. The rhythm is correct. Thank you. Sit down if you're going to watch. Don't hover. Hovering is annoying. You sit down on the gravel. He works. The tapping of the chisel. The small sound of wood receiving the blade. The river 3 feet away. Always. The particular quality of air before dawn, cold and very clear, like the day hasn't committed to being anything yet. After a while he says, "How long have you been working with wood?" "Since I could hold a tool." "Father." "Father." He nods, still not looking up from the scales. "Mine too." "Grandfather before him." Pause. "This ship will be the best work I've ever sent into fire. That bothers me more than I expected." You understand this completely. "The knotwork too," you say. He makes a sound of acknowledgement. The chisel moves. Another scale joins the neck of the serpent. "What's the saying?" you ask. "After something you've made is finished?" He considers this. "There's one my grandfather used," he says. "Not noble, practical." He settles back on his heels, examines the scales in the lamplight. "Let it go. Wood wants to burn eventually. This one just gets to burn magnificently." He goes back to work. You sit with that. Wood wants to burn eventually. The Nar wants to burn eventually too. Somewhere in its future, in the fire of a trading post, or broken on a rocky coast, or simply rotting in a harbour when it's too old to seal, it will go. Every hull does. This one just goes magnificently. This one goes doing exactly the thing it was shaped for. Mid-morning. The old woman moves through the camp with a specific quality of attention that makes people step aside automatically without being asked. Not out of fear, out of the recognition of someone operating at full capacity in their specific purpose. She has been awake since before you were. You know this because when you woke to the sound of carving, the special fire in front of the burial ship was already burning with the deliberate, sustained flame of something attended throughout the night. She tended it all night. She tended it, and she chanted, and she made whatever preparation she needed to make, and now she is moving through the camp doing the final round of something you don't have the framework to precisely name. Checking, that's the closest word. Checking that all elements are in their correct state, that the grave goods are properly arranged, that the men who have roles in the ceremony know their roles, that the sequence will unfold correctly. She stops at the Nar. You're standing next to it, hands at your sides, because your work on the Nair is done and you're not sure what to do with yourself in the hours before the burning. She looks at you. "You'll be there," she says, not a question. "Yes." "At the water?" "Yes." She examines your face for a moment with the assessment she brings to everything. "When you watch," she says, "watch with your hands too." You look at your hands. Pitch black at the fingertips, the working callus at the heel of each palm, the scar on the right thumb. "How?" "You'll know," she says. "You already do. You listen to the seams." She moves on. You stand there for a moment with your hands half raised, looking at them. Then you understand. The same principle. Active attention. Not passive watching, but the full engagement of a person who is present in their body, not just their eyes. The way you press your palms against a hull, and let information travel from wood to skin to understanding. You can do that at the ceremony. You can be present the way the craftsman is present at the work, not watching from outside, inside, receiving. You lower your hands, the river goes south, the morning goes on. The ceremony proceeds as I've told you. The ship is moved to the water, the ropes hold it in the current, the preparations are completed. Marit walks through the camp. She finds your eyes. You hold her gaze for 5 seconds, maybe 6. You don't look away. The burning. I want to describe it from the inside of what the old woman told you. Hands too. You're standing at the water's edge with your hands at your sides, open, palms facing the river, cold air off the water moving across them. The specific temperature of September Volga air against skin. Not the killing cold of deep winter, but the cold that means something. The cold that says, this is real. You are here. Pay attention. The arrow goes, the fire catches, and you receive it. Not just with your eyes. The old woman was right. You already knew how. Through your palms, through the soles of your feet on the cold gravel, through the skin of your face. The heat of it reaching you before the sound because light travels faster. The radiance of the fire on your face and hands before the rushing sound of the flame spreading. Your eyes. The ship going south trailing fire. The serpent prow outlined in orange light. The carved scales. His scales. The craftsman's work. Bright for a moment before the fire takes them. Your hands. Warmth radiating across the water, pulsing, the way heat from the tar pot pulsed into your palms when you held it for warmth. The fire is far enough that it's subtle. You have to pay attention. You pay attention. Your feet, the gravel shifting slightly as the water displaced by the burning ship pushes outward in small waves that reach the bank and move the stones minutely. Your face, the specific smell of burning old wood, which is different from burning green wood, different from burning buildings, different from forge fire, something sweeter, more complete. A thing that has been many things, living tree, shaped timber, working vessel, decorated ceremony, becoming none of those things and returning to what all of those things were before they were anything. Carbon and light. The ship goes south. The fire goes with it. The old woman finds you as the smoke thins. What did you see? She asks. Care, you say. Both of them cared for, everything honest. Yes, that is what you saw. Angel of death. She stops. Did it work? The ceremony. Does it? She turns back, studies your face. I don't know. I have never known. I perform the ceremony correctly. What follows is not mine to witness. A pause. But I have done this for 40 years, and the ceremony feels different when it's done right. The wrongness lifts. She looks at the river, faint smoke threading the grey sky. Today it lifted. She walks back into the camp. Ibn Fadlan finds you an hour later. You're sitting on the log where he usually sits. You've taken his spot without planning to, and you notice this only when he approaches and stops. Sorry, you say, starting to move. No. He sits on the gravel beside the log. This puts him lower than you, which is clearly uncomfortable for a man of his dignity, but he manages it with the adaptability of someone who has spent a year travelling through places with no furniture. He doesn't open his writing materials. How long before you continue north, he asks. 2 days. 3, if Ulf needs more time. And then the compound. And then winter. He nods, looks at the river. The smoke is gone now, just river. My journey home takes 8 months, he says, if everything goes correctly, which it rarely does. When you get back, you start. Yes, I write the account. the full account. He's quiet for a moment. I have been thinking about what to write about today, about the ceremony. What will you say? He looks at you. That I've never seen a people bury their dead with such completeness, he says. That the ceremony was, he searches, generous, in the old meaning of the word, full of the thing being given. You think about this. She volunteered, you say, meaning Marit. She said so 3 days ago. He is quiet for a long moment. Yes, he says finally, I will write that too. He looks at the river. The writing is all I have, he says, and there's something in his voice that's not self-pity. It's simpler than that. A statement of fact. The craft he practices and its limitations. I cannot change what happened. I can only write it correctly and hope that correctness is itself a kind of care. You think about the seventh frame, the hairline crack, the thinned tar seeping into the grain. Treat the wood as wood, not as what it's part of. Correctness is care, you say. Yes. He looks at you with the expression of someone hearing an unexpected answer to a question they've been working on for a while. Then he opens his writing materials and begins. You sit on his log. The river goes south. The convoy leaves 2 days later. Northward, back up the river system toward the compound and the winter and the practical machinery of survival. The boat's loaded, the ropes cast off, the rhythm of oars finding the current. You're at the starboard oar on the Nar, one of 12 men pulling in unison, the stroke count set by Ulf at the bow. The camp falls away behind you. The bank, the fire pits, the space where the burial ship sat on its rollers. You watch it for as long as you can see it. Then the river bends, and it's gone. 3 hours north, a bend in the river turns the camp completely out of sight, and the Volga ahead of you is silver-grey and moving and carrying what it carries without comment. Thorstein is at the oar behind you. He's been on this river for 6 seasons and rows with the economy of someone who has worked out exactly how to do this for hours without wasting anything. Your first time, he asks? Ceremony? Yes. Gets easier, he says. Most things do. You think about what you want to say to that. I don't want it to get easier, you say. He rows, doesn't answer for a while. Then it won't, he says finally. Like that settles something. Maybe it does. You winter in the compound. This is what that means practically. You share a building with 11 other men, and the constant smell of unwashed wool and damp wood, and the specific sour smell of fermented grain drink consume steadily through the long dark months. You eat preserved fish and hard bread and occasionally something that's what they're calling it and occasionally obviously isn't. You work when work needs doing. There's always work. Repairing the compound structures, maintaining the boats, the endless small maintenance of things that must survive to be used in spring. The compound itself is a structure that exists at the intersection of necessity and ambition. 3 large buildings inside a wooden palisade, the main hall where everyone eats and many people sleep. A separate storage building for trade goods, the silk and the silver and the furs and the amber, the things that move up and down this river system like blood through an enormous body. And a workshop, which is where you spend most of your time, because workshops exist in all human settlements, and workshop people gravitate toward workshops the way water finds its level. The workshop has a forge, a carpentry corner, a space for leatherwork, and a general area for whatever needs doing. On any given day, there are 4 or 5 people in it working on different things simultaneously, creating a comfortable density of purpose. This is where you belong. You know it within the first week. The carpenter in the compound is a man named Bjarne. He's older than you by 20 years, which in this setting means he's lived through things that would have ended many other people, and the evidence of this is visible in various ways. A missing left ear, a right hand that closes, imperfectly due to an old scar across the palm, a general quality of durability about him that goes beyond just physical. He looks at your tools on your first morning in the workshop and says nothing. Looks at your hands, says nothing. Sets you to work on a bench repair that needs doing, watches you for 5 minutes, then goes back to his own project. At midday he says, "Who taught you?" "My father." "Where?" "Western Norway. Of a fjord you haven't heard of." "I've heard of more fjords than you think." He eats his bread without looking up. "Your father taught you to read the grain before you cut." "Yes." Most people don't learn that until they've ruined enough wood that they start paying attention. Your father must have been a patient man. He had 3 sons. He needed to be. Bjarne makes a sound that might be appreciation and goes back to his bread. This is the beginning of the most useful friendship you'll have in the compound. Bjarne has opinions about wood the way the old woman has opinions about ceremony. Deep-rooted, specific, born from decades of working with one thing until the thing has no more secrets left to keep. He can look at a tree. He does this one afternoon in October when you walk with him into the forest to source timber and tell you things about it that you wouldn't find until you cut it open. The growth rings visible in the pattern of the bark, the slight lean in the trunk that tells you which side endured more wind, the root structure suggested by how the ground rises around the base. "This one," he says, stopping at an oak that looks to your eye like every other oak in this forest. "Why?" "Slow growth, tight rings. It grew in competition with the one that came down last winter." He points to a stump 20 feet away, and it had to fight for light its whole life. That makes dense wood stronger, better for anything structural. You look at the stump, then back at the oak. "How do you know the stump is from last winter?" "The cut face. Weathered but not rotted. Fresh enough that the wood below the surface is still light-coloured." He starts marking the tree. "Also, there's a tree above the stump that's showing new growth at angles it wouldn't need if the stump tree was still standing." You look at the tree above the stump. It's true. Branches reaching into a space where they wouldn't have had sun before. "You read the whole forest," you say. "I read what's in front of me." He marks the oak. "Same thing you do with a seam. Same thing anyone does with any material if they're paying enough attention." You stand in the October forest with this thought for a long moment. Same thing the old woman does with a ceremony. Same thing Ibn Fadlan does with an account. Same thing Marit did in the tent when she evaluated every person who entered. Paying attention is the skill. Everything else is just what you pay attention to. October becomes November, and November becomes the particular darkness of a northern winter on the Volga. The darkness is different here than at home. In Norway the winter dark comes with the mountains and the fjords giving it shape, hemming it in, making it a local thing. Here the sky is enormous and flat, and the dark covers it all, and the land beneath seems to accept this with a kind of vast resignation. You work by firelight and lamplight. Your hands adapt. After a week of working in reduced light, your eyes find things they couldn't before. Small differences in grain that you'd been seeing with your eyes become things you feel with your fingertips. The old woman's instruction, "Watch with your hands too," continues to find new applications. You carve in the evenings, not furniture, not structural work. You carve things for yourself. for the first time in years. Patterns mostly. The repeating knot designs you learned from your father and extended on the burial ship's hull. You work through them with a small knife on pieces of scrap wood, finding the rhythm of each one, following where each line must go given where the others have already been. Bjarn watches you do this for 2 weeks before he says anything. "Those are your patterns," he says one evening, not a question. "My father's, that I've made into mine." There's a difference between the ones you're remembering and the ones you're making. You look at the piece in your hand. You know which is which. "The ones I'm making have more of the ceremony in them," you say. He considers this without asking you to explain it. "Show me the ceremony ones," he says. You show him. He looks at them for a long time, turning the pieces in the firelight. "These go on the next commission we take," he says, "if you want." "Where?" "Gunnar's sending a boat north in spring. He wants it decorated." Pause. "New boat. Nice work. He's paying well." Gunnar, one of the chieftain's lieutenants, the one who stood at the burial ceremony with the controlled expression and loosed the burning arrow with absolute precision. What kind of decoration? The knotwork he's seen, wants it on the bow and stern, wants it to look like the burial ship. You look at the carved piece in your hand. He's putting the burial ship's patterns on his new boat, you say. He's keeping something alive, Bjarn says, in the way that's available to him. You put the carved piece down. "Yes," you say, "I'll do it." Gunnar himself finds you in the workshop the following week. He's a large man. You knew this from the camp. You've seen him across fires and across the camp. Up close, the largeness is more specific, not just height, but density, the quality of someone who has been a physical person their entire life and whose body reflects it completely. He looks at your hands when he comes in, then at the tools, then at the work on the bench. "Bjarn says you'll take the commission," he says. "Yes." "I want the pattern from the burial ship, the band at the waterline. I can do the pattern and more," you say. "If you want..." He looks at you. "More how?" You go to the shelf where your evening carvings are lined up. You pick out 3 pieces, the ones that Bjarn called the ceremony ones, the ones where the patterns have something in them that came from the burial and not from memory. You set them on the bench in front of Gunnar. He looks at them for a long time. He picks up the middle one, turns it, puts it down, picks up the right one. His expression during this is the controlled expression, the same one from the ceremony, holding something still by deliberate effort. "How much?" he says. You think about Bjarna's instruction on pricing. Charge what it's worth to you. If you charge less, you'll resent the work. If you charge more, you'll rush it. The right price is the one where you do your best work without resentment. You name a price. Gunnar doesn't flinch. "Done," he says. He walks out. You look at the 3 carved pieces on the bench. Part of the burial ship's logic is going north on a new boat in the spring. The patterns will cross distances that the burial ship itself never travelled, will be seen by people who will never know where they started or what they meant to the person who first made them. This seems correct. Wood carries what's put into it. Winter deepens. December brings cold of a quality that requires renegotiating your relationship with the word cold. This is not the temperature being unpleasant. This is the temperature being a force that has opinions about you. The river freezes along the banks first. You watch it happen over 3 days. Ice forming at the edges in the mornings, melting back by midday, then one night cold enough that it doesn't melt back, and by morning the ice has established a permanent claim to the near bank, and then it grows, daily, until the centre current is a dark strip between two expanses of white. Then one morning that strip is gone too. The Volga is frozen. You know this is not permanent. You know it from the men who have wintered here before, who treat the freeze as a seasonal fact like any other. The river will thaw in spring and resume its southward business without opinion. But in November and December and January, standing on the bank looking at the expanse of ice, knowing that somewhere under those feet of ice the river is still running, still going south, still carrying its cargo of dissolved minerals and the memory of everything that has happened on it and to it. Something about that seems important. You keep going even when you can't be seen to keep going. The river doesn't stop. It just goes underground. On a February evening, with the cold outside at its most sincere commitment, you tell someone the burial story for the first time. His name is Leif. He's 15, the youngest person in the compound by several years, sent east by a father who has more sons than opportunities and a practical view of what to do about it. He does everything anyone tells him with the desperate efficiency of someone who understands that his position here is not guaranteed. He reminds you of yourself 3 years ago. You've been teaching him some of what your father taught you, not formally, just answering questions when he asks them, showing him things when he's watching. How to read a seam. How to choose which side of a piece of wood should face outward. How to hold a draw knife so the resistance in the wood tells you things instead of just stopping you. He's quick. He remembers what he's shown. He asks better questions each week. One evening, when the workshop is emptied out by supper and the two of you are still there because neither of you is particularly hungry yet, he asks about the pattern you're working on, the pattern for Gunnar's boat. And you tell him, not a formal account, not the precision that Ibn Fadlan brings to his waxboard, just the story, the way stories get told around fires, beginning where it begins, going where it goes, not knowing while you tell it which parts matter until you hear yourself say them. The tar, the gnar, the old woman, Marit in the tent saying volunteered with those smooth edges on it, the 4 local men and the carved bear worn warm by years of handling, Ibn Fadlan on his log with his waxboard, the ship going south on fire, the 5 seconds, the wrongness lifting. Leif listens with the complete attention of a young person who hasn't yet learned to moderate their interest in things. When you finish, he's quiet for a while. She chose you, he says, out of everyone. Yes, because you didn't say the easy things. You look at him. He's 15 and he's understood the most important part. Yes, you say. That's why. He nods slowly, absorbing it. I'll remember that, he says, not saying the easy things. It's harder than it sounds. I know. He looks at the pattern on the bench. But I'll remember. Spring comes eventually. It always does, which is a form of promise that this particular winter kept requiring you to hold on to during its less convincing months. The ice goes. The Volga comes back. The mud on the bank becomes negotiable rather than absolute. The birds return, types you saw in the south, types that belong to this latitude, and for about 2 weeks a parade of types that are passing through to somewhere further north, filling the bare branches with noise and colour in a way that seems disproportionately generous after the long quiet. Gunnar's boat is ready. You spent the winter on it between other tasks. The knotwork along the bow and stern, your father's patterns and the ones from the burial and the ones that developed from the combination. Things neither your father nor the ceremony created. Things that exist because you spent a winter with these 2 influences in the same space. Bjarne looks at the finished boat with his hands, not his eyes. Good, he says. This from Bjarne means what it means. Gunnar looks at it for a long time. He doesn't say anything for a while. Then, she would have seen this at the ceremony, this old woman. Yes, you say. And she would have, yes, I think so. He nods, puts his hand flat on the bow where the knotwork begins, holds it there for a moment. Then he takes his hand away. Good work, he says. He walks to the boat to begin loading his cargo. You stand at the bank when Gunnar's boat departs. It goes north, the opposite direction from the burning. The knotwork goes with it, visible even at distance, the pattern running around the bow in the morning light. Your father's patterns, your ceremony patterns, going north on a trader's boat to wherever it ends up. Ulf stands beside you. Are you staying? He asks. This is the same question from the autumn. He's asking it again because the answer might have changed. You look north, where Gunnar's boat is getting smaller. You look south, where the river goes toward the Volga bend where the camp was, where the burial ship's ash lies in the river silt. One more season, you say? Ulf nods. After that? You think about Leif, who will finish this season and go back home if he chooses, or continue east if he chooses, or go somewhere else entirely that nobody here has planned for. You think about Ibn Fadlan somewhere south of here, writing his account, getting the words right. The wrongness lifts. You think about the old woman and her 40 years of not knowing if it works and doing it correctly every time anyway. After that, you say, I don't know yet. That's honest, Ulf says. My father taught me that too. He makes a sound of mild satisfaction and goes back to the compound. You stay. Not one more season. 3. The third year you understand why. Not because the Volga has trapped you or because you lack the will to leave, because you're not finished yet. There are things the river still has to show you. Things that only become visible after you've been somewhere long enough for it to stop performing for you and just be itself. In the second year, you see a burial from the other side. You're one of the men who helps prepare a craftsman named Asgeir, who dies of fever in July with no family present and a small collection of well-made tools that he would have wanted handled properly. The old woman isn't there for this one. She left the river after the chieftain's burial, went somewhere south, nobody knows exactly where. You do the best you can. You dress Asgeir in his working clothes. You place his best chisel in his hands. You speak the words you remember from the ceremony imperfectly, knowing that imperfect is what's available. You think, the wrongness lifts, or it doesn't. You do the work correctly. You think it lifts. In the third year, a letter arrives from Norway, from your father. It takes 4 months to reach you, carried in pieces from boat to boat through the trading network, and when it gets to you the wax seal is broken and resealed twice, and the paper inside is faintly water damaged along the bottom edge. But it's his handwriting, the specific shapes your father makes with a stylus, the Norse letters he learned from a monk who spent a winter in your village 20 years ago and left behind the rudiments of literacy as a gift. Your father's letters are large and slightly uneven, like a man who learned to write in middle age from someone who had infinite patience. He writes, Your mother sends love. The fjord is the same. Your brother Ivar has taken over the boat building. He's good, but not as good as you. Don't tell him I said this. Your other brother Eric has gone to England. We don't know exactly where. Then, I heard from a man who met someone who travelled the eastern rivers that you did good work on a burial ship on the Volga. I don't know if this is true, but I believe it. Come home when you're ready. You read this letter 3 times. The fourth time you notice you're crying, which is inefficient in the cold, and you stop. You fold the letter carefully and put it in the bottom of your father's tool bag, where it can travel with the tools. You go back to work. The day you leave, the river is in spring flood, high and brown and fast, carrying trees and debris and the accumulated thaw of an entire Russian winter. The current is 3 times what it was in September 3 years ago. The banks are half submerged. The Nar sits low and confident, properly caulked for its journey north. You checked every seam last week, every frame, every joint. It's honest. Ulf watches you do this and says nothing, which is his way of saying everything. Leif is staying. He's found his place here the way you found yours. Not by deciding, but by noticing that he'd already stopped imagining leaving. He'll be fine. He understands how to read a seam now, how to choose the slow-growth oak, how not to say the easy things. Take care of the workshop, you say. Bjarne runs the workshop, he says. Take care of Bjarne, then. Leif looks at you with the expression of someone who has learned, over a year, how to hold a more complicated conversation in a simpler one. I will, he says. You clasp his arm. You step onto the Nar, northward. The oar finds your palms before the boat has moved 10 feet. The weight of it, the river's resistance through the blade, the stroke that your body has memorized so thoroughly it happens before you think about it. The compound falls away, the bank, the workshop, the place where Bjarne is probably already working on whatever comes next, because Bjarne doesn't watch things leave. He just keeps working. The stump where the forest begins, the one whose fall let the oak grow outward and made the oak dense and slow and excellent. The river bends. Gone. You travel for 3 weeks. Through the system of rivers and portages that seemed impossible when you first navigated it east, and now feels like a route your body knows without consulting your brain. The portage points, the places where the current runs wrong and you have to read the water ahead before committing. The trading posts, some of which you know by name now, where faces have become familiar in the way that faces become familiar over years. At the last portage before the final river, the one that will take you to the sea roads home, you stop for a night at a trading post. In the trading post there is a man from Baghdad. Not Ibn Fadlan, different man, different mission, different year. But an Arab diplomat with a wax board and a bone stylus, and the specific quality of attention that that particular kind of person has. He's been travelling east from the Baltic coast, heading toward the Volga routes. At supper you end up sitting near each other, and the conversation finds the place. Conversations find when people have things in common. You know the river, he asks. 3 years on it. You've seen the Norse burial practices? You look at him. Yes, you say. Once. My colleague Ibn Fadlan wrote an account, he says. You've heard of him. He travelled this route several years ago. I met him, you say. The diplomat stares at you. At the ceremony, he says. You were there. I sealed the Nar, you say. He sat on the log where I kept my tar pot. The diplomat makes a sound that is approximately the sound of someone who's been sent on a long journey to learn about something and has just unexpectedly found a primary source at supper. Tell me, he says. He's already reaching for his wax board. You look at your hands, pine tar still under the nails despite 3 weeks of travel. It doesn't come out easily, maybe it doesn't come out at all. Maybe it just becomes part of the skin. Yes, you say. From the beginning? From the beginning. He settles the board on his knee, positions the stylus. You begin. The account you give him takes 3 hours, not because you're being comprehensive in the way Ibn Fadlan is comprehensive, not the formal account, not the diplomat's inventory. You tell him the craftsman's version, the seams and the tar and the gravel under your boots, the old woman's specific efficiency, the carved bear warm from years of handling. Marit's 5 seconds. You tell him about that last and you tell it correctly. Not the easy version, not the version where you say something meaningful and the moment acquires a comfortable narrative shape. The true version, you were a 19-year-old craftsman with pitch-black hands, and you didn't say the easy things, and she chose you to see her, and you saw her. And then you stood on the bank and bore witness, and the wrongness lifted. That's all. That's what happened. He writes all of it. When you finish, he looks at his wax board for a long moment. This account of Ibn Fadlan's, he says slowly, what he wrote. It ends with the ceremony, the burning. It doesn't, he gestures vaguely, continue. No, you say. He went home. He doesn't know what happened to the people who were there. Afterward, no, but you do. You think about Ulf and Bjarne and Leif and Gunnar's boat going north with the ceremony patterns on its bow. About the 4 local men and the carved bear. About the old woman who went south and whose name you still can't quite reproduce in your own mouth. About the compound that kept running, kept trading, kept maintaining the Nar through every winter, because the work has to keep being done or the thing falls apart. Some of it, you say. I know some of it. He writes, you reach the coast in late spring. The smell of the sea is different from the smell of the river. Bigger, more absolute. The river smells of its bed, of the specific land it moves through. The sea smells of nothing in particular and everything in general, like the smell of distance itself. You stand on the coast and you breathe it, your father's tool bag on your shoulder. 3 years of the Volga in your hands and your eyes, and the specific things your body knows that it didn't know before. You find a ship going west. You seal the deal in Arabic by accident, because that's the language the harbour master speaks, and you've gotten comfortable in it over 3 years. You step on board. The oar finds your palms. West. On the crossing, in the specific quiet of open water at night when the stars come out and the sea is flat enough that the boat almost seems not to move, you sit at the bow and you think about the old woman's question. What did you see? You've been answering it for 3 years. Every time you told the story, every carving, every seam checked with your hands, every lesson given to Leif in the workshop by lamplight. You've been answering it the only way available, by continuing to be the person who was there, who saw it, who carried it forward. That's what the ceremony gave you. Not certainty. You still don't have that. Not resolution. The questions the ceremony raised are still the questions it raised. They don't have comfortable answers. It gave you a way of being a witness, not just to that ceremony, to everything. The seam that's dishonest and needs honest work, the crack at the 7th frame, the slow-growth oak that grew dense from competition, Leif getting better at questions, Bjarne's hands reading the hull, the old woman saying the wrongness lifts. You pay attention, you don't look away, you do the work correctly and you don't say the easy things. That's the ceremony. That's what it taught you. That's what it still teaches you, every day, in every material. Home. The fjord looks smaller than you left it. Not because it changed, because you did. Your father is at the boatyard when you arrive, not waiting for you. He doesn't know you're coming. The letter took 4 months to reach you, and 4 more would take your return notice back. You're just here, walking up the path from the dock. He sees you from the boatyard. He doesn't stop working immediately. He finishes the stroke of the plane he's making, the long stroke with the resistance of the wood telling him something, and then he sets the tool down and he walks toward you. He looks at your hands first, the pitch black under the nails that doesn't come out, then your face. He nods, the nod of someone who recognizes the person standing in front of him and is revising their idea of that person to include 3 years they weren't present for. You ate enough, he says. Most of the time, you say. Good. He turns back toward the boatyard. There's a nair that needs sealing, hull work, took a bad season. You follow him. He hands you a tar brush. You put your palms against the hull. You listen. Now. Right now, in whatever dark or dim room you're in whatever year this is, centuries past the Volga, centuries past the ceremony, past the old woman and the bone stylus and the carved bear worn warm by generations of handling, the river still runs. Not that river specifically, not that water, but the southward pull of things. The way events move in one direction and carry everything on. Them. The ceremony is gone. The burial ship is ash in the silt. The old woman is gone. Ibn Fadlan's waxboard is gone. The words transferred to paper and then to copies of copies, surviving by the specific accident of people thinking it was worth keeping. What remains is what remains. The knotwork on Gunnar's boat, somewhere in the silt of a different river, in a country that calls itself by different names now. The account, Ibn Fadlan's and the diplomats at the trading post, and yours, told over and over to anyone who would listen until it became part of the record. And this, tonight, you, here, having been there. The river carries what it carries. Let your body do what it knows how to do. You've been paying attention all night. The cold Volga air on your palms, the hiss of hot tar in a dishonest seam, the weight of a burial ship through 30 pairs of hands, the 5 seconds of a gaze that chose to see and be seen. Your attention can rest now. It's done the work it came to do. Let your hands open, not gripping anything, not pressing against hull timber or tar brush or oar handle, just open. The palms that were on the burial ship as it went to the water, the palms that found the dishonest seam and made it honest, the palms your father's teaching lives in, open, receiving the cool air of wherever you are. Just this. The river goes south. It has been going south since before anyone gave it a name. In the silt of the riverbed, ash mingles with 3,000 years of sedimentation. The serpent prow, the silt, the carved scales that a craftsman added by lamplight the morning of the burning, the knotwork at the waterline, gone into the river's keeping, not gone, different. The river keeps what it takes. You're warm enough, you're safe enough, you're here. That's more than most of what was required. That's enough. Sleep comes the way the river comes to the sea, not dramatically, not urgently, but with the certainty of something following the grade of the land, going where it's always been going, arriving where it was always going to arrive. Let it come. Let the Volga go south without you for a while. Let the ceremony be complete. Let the wrongness lift. Let your thoughts slow the way a river slows when it reaches flat ground, spreading out, losing its urgency, becoming wide and shallow and almost still. Let the sounds become river sounds. Let the dark become September dark over still water. Let rest find you the way tar finds an honest seam, completely without gaps, settling into the spaces you didn't know were there. Good night.